who is going to make the Minnesota Vikings 53-man roster? We go through my final predictions and why Jaren Hall is all of a sudden way more likely to make the roster than he was even at 8 a.m. this morning. Something happened with the NFL rules that you're going to need to know about. Plus, we have a resolution with Dalton Risner, and we'll talk about what that means. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, producer Dave. Dave, we're almost here. We are almost here. And it's really exciting. Really, really exciting. The fact that the Minnesota Vikings are almost at the point where they're going to have their 53-man roster. And along with that, Dave, they're going to be that much closer to playing a football game that matters. How excited are you?
I'm real excited. And they'll get to the 53, then they'll start putting in the game plan for week 1 against the New York Giants. I can't wait.
It's going to be really exciting, but we have to talk about some things that happened today, and then we'll go through my final 53-man roster prediction. The Vikings did make a roster move on 15 players today. They waived 13, terminated a contract of 1, and put 1 on injured reserve. So let's kind of have a conversation about the players that got impacted today. All right. And I need to pull that up because I'll be honest, none of them were on my final 53. So it kind of still works. All right. They waived the following players: quarterback Matt Corral, running back Dwayne McBride, running back Mo Ibrahim, wide receiver Justin Hall, tight end Sammy Reyes, tight end Neil Johnson, offensive lineman Chuck Filiaga, offensive lineman Doug Nestor, offensive lineman Matt Cindric, offensive lineman Spencer Rowland, outside linebacker Owen Porter, defensive lineman Tyler Manoa, and cornerback Jalen Williams. They also terminated the contract of cornerback AJ Green. Now, here's the differentiating factor that you need to know. If you have 4 or more vested NFL seasons, you don't hit waivers. You are released. And because you're released, you are free to sign with any team at any time. If you don't have that many vested years, you are on waivers and subject to being claimed by another franchise. It goes in inverse order of the NFL draft. And Carolina Panthers have top claim. Kansas City Chiefs have worst claim. So that's what we're looking at here. And this is just the start. So at this point, after this wave of cuts, the Vikings had 77 players on their roster. They still needed to make moves on 24. Now, Sammy Reyes was the international pathway player, meaning they could have a 91st player on their 90-man roster because he technically was a roster exemption. Now, you still had to pay him like you would a normal player in his position with however many service years and whatnot, which I believe that he has 1 full service year, so he gets paid like a second-year player. So that matters in this context. And they made 14 moves, and they made a 15th, and this is an interesting one. They put Dalton Risner on injured reserve, Dave, and we were talking about this pre-show. I personally think this is a precursor to being cut. Now, let me explain. If you remember, I believe it was last year, linebacker Ryan Connolly tore his ACL the year before, started on PUP, and then they activated him and subsequently cut him. Because they cut him. Because they weren't able to cut him while he was hurt, he ended up on the PUP list, got a few game checks. It is what it is. I think that's what's happening with Risner. He's not healthy enough to cut, not healthy enough to trade. So what the Vikings are doing is putting him on injured reserve because he has those roster incentives in his contract. And then they're going to cut ties with him once he's healthy enough to come off of injured reserve. That's my theory. Not 100% sure where the Vikings are leaning with this, but that's kind of how I see it right now. And I think it's a smart strategy if they really do want to part ways with Dalton Risner.
How many weeks? I know these rules have changed. Does he have to be on IR before he can be designated to return?
He can be designated to return the Tuesday after week 4. So he has to be on there for 4 games.
Okay.
And then once he's designated to return, he has 21 days to return to the active roster. Otherwise, he goes back on injured reserve. So it's almost like, how there's heaven, there's hell, and there's purgatory. Theoretically, this is kind of like purgatory. He's in that middle limbo where he can practice, he can do all of that stuff, but he can't actually play.
You're talking the 21 days, the 3 weeks.
Yes, that 21-day window. It's kind of like that purgatory. You're kind of in between worlds. So I think that that's going to be an interesting element. Maybe they want him back. I don't.
Maybe it's an insurance policy. If Ed or Blake get hurt in those first 4 games, they have somebody that they can rely on. At least they know the level of play and knows the playbook that they can stick in as soon as he gets off of that injured reserve deal. And this allows them not to count him against the 53 at this time.
Yeah.
I was sort of wondering if they were going to do that with Jaren Hall and his leg contusion.
Yeah, that was a theory of mine too, but now they don't have to, and we'll explain that in a minute. I think it's an interesting theory that you have, Dave, where putting him on injured reserve, even though you may have plans to cut him, you want to hold off on making any kind of confirmation because you have not question marks at those positions, but now you have that insurance policy. And I think that insurance policy is a good thing. Hey, Odie, get out of there. Go boy, chew your bone. Yeah, he was trying to get into my closet. Little turkey. I don't think he likes the fact that it's raining. But he will be just fine. He's a good boy.
I saw a big storm heading your way.
That supposedly like dollar coin sized hail, I think it was, that you sent me.
Cool.
Oh, hey, bud.
We had some gully washers today down here too. It helped cool everything off. Wonderful. And I know it's warm up in the upper Midwest right now. Saw a post about corn sweating.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's transition into Jaren Hall, because I think we've said all we need to about the cuts and about Dalton Risner. So, Dave, we'll get to your question, but I think we need to at least acknowledge the rule change here first, okay? The rule change, and something we've been talking about why Jaren Hall may or may not make the roster, is because you were able to, before today, have your quarterback on the practice squad and elevate him an unlimited amount of times as the emergency third quarterback. This morning, the NFLPA vetoed that. Here's what that means. You have to be on the roster as QB3. You can't be a practice squad guy. So that was going to be a rule change. Last year, they made it so a third quarterback could be elevated with a free roster spot. That was that stemmed from the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game. Brock Purdy tore his UCL. Then Josh Johnson got hurt. All of a sudden, they don't have a quarterback. They're running Wildcat with Christian McCaffrey. Not exactly a winning formula. Now, he is a better passer than most running backs, but he's still a running back playing quarterback, and that's never a good thing. So you have a situation where, hey, if you would have had this rule in place, it may have been competitive. What if that guy was Josh Dobbs? Now you're going to have that third quarterback every time, as long as a player is on the roster. That's the key here. So you have that. And Dave asked the question about my show, Purple Daily Meat and Potatoes for SKOL North, which I highly recommend you go check it out. He said, this morning you said Mullens is the clear 2. Most local analysts say that, but what has he done better than Hall? Hall is the one making must-see plays on the NFL Network. I think this is a really good question, Dave, and I think we're going to break it down in multiple parts. One of the things that you have to understand with preseason, and this isn't necessarily to say that you don't, but I'm just talking in the general sense. I related it to playing the NCAA football game. We were thrilled that that game came out. If I beat a team 110-10 on varsity and you beat them 110-10 on All-American, which is one step up, you are a much better player than me because you did better against a harder difficulty. And I think that's kind of the same construct when we're talking about guys like Jaren Hall playing well in the second half of preseason game number 2 and the first half of preseason game number 3. You want to see good process. You want to see them making the right decisions. You want to see them making good throws. But you also have to understand the flaws in evaluating a preseason game versus evaluating a regular season game. It's not that they're not trying. They're not going all out to try to beat you. They're playing basic generic coverages. Think of the coverages you would use in Madden. Cover one robber, quarters. That's what they're doing. They're not calling all these intricate man match concepts like they would in the regular season. And because they're not doing that, it's much harder to judge what each player is doing versus what they would do against the ones every time. And I think that matters here. And when I was watching Jaren Hall, I wanted to watch how he ran the offense. I wanted to watch how he handled himself. What was his process? Because you know what? If he has a good process against third and fourth stringers, chances are he's going to have a good process running with the first team against the other first team. That process will carry over. If he's staying poised in the pocket with pressure against a third stringer, he's probably going to do that if Aaron Donald's coming in his face. Because they're both coming in his face and they're both going to attack you. So I wanted to look at that process, and I thought his process was really good. One of the reasons why I think Nick Mullens is the clear number 2, I just think he's a better quarterback. Now, we know Mullens is a flawed quarterback. He throws way too many interceptions. I think he's got 34 touchdowns, 31 picks in his career. Not a really good ratio, but he knows how to get you into games. He knows how to put up points, and he has no problem putting the ball into a tight window to try and make a play. He is a gunslinger. Because he's a gunslinger, you're going to have some of those negatives. Brett Favre is the ultimate version of a gunslinger. Warren Moon, the guy who I have 2 jerseys behind me, ultimate version of a gunslinger. And because of that, you're going to have a lot of really good pluses, which Hall currently does not give you. You're also going to have some of those negatives, which also Hall does not give you. So as Dave, you say, you think Hall takes care of the ball better. I agree. I do think Hall takes care of the ball better. But that's only one aspect to the quarterback position. And Mullens has the experience. He started 20 games in the National Football League. He's played really well when it's mattered. He knows how to try and fit the ball into tight windows. There's so many elements that Mullens does well. And the reason why he's not a starter is because of those negatives. The ball security is the big one. So, and he also invites hits like he's Wile E. Coyote. Like that Browns game was brutal because he would be like, okay, I'm going to throw the ball away. But while I'm throwing the ball away, I'm going to take like 2 steps forward, then throw it so I can get hit. It's just uncanny. But I think long-term Hall is going to be the backup quarterback here, especially when you talk about cost control. I don't know if you're going to get Mullens back for the same price that you have him at, which is a $2.25 million cap hit. I think you're going to have to pay him more than that. And I will take Hall. I think his cap hits for the next 2 years will be a combined like 2.25 to 2.5 million. That's a valuable asset when you're talking about having a quarterback on a rookie contract as your starter. Now, I haven't given up that Hall can be a starter, but I've given up the dream of him being the guy for the Minnesota Vikings. I just don't think that's plausible at this point. The only way it's plausible is if JJ McCarthy just is an abject disaster or has a career-ending injury and Jaren Hall is forced to step in and he balls out and takes the job. Kind of like Dak Prescott situation. I think that's the only way that Hall is going to be the guy. I'm not going to wish that. Nobody is. I think JJ can really be the guy, and he showed that in the first preseason game. But I do believe he has the potential to be a starter in this league. And that's a great thing to have as your backup. Now, one of the things we had talked about, Dave, leading up to this was, do they risk putting him on waivers? I thought coming out of the Raiders game, I didn't think he was on my 53-man roster. But we also knew that J.J. McCarthy was healthy, and Hall just played bad. He was playing tight. He was playing rushed. He was just playing like his job was already lost, and he was panicking. It was almost like when McCarthy went on injured reserve and then he came out that next week. He played loose. He played comfortable, and he put up a perfect passer rating. And that beautiful throw on the move to Deshaun Jones for that crossing route touchdown. Great high-level stuff. That's something you'd see from Aaron Rodgers and be like, whoa, what a throw. So I think some of that matters. The fact that he came out and he rebounded, and then he proved it again against the Philadelphia Eagles. So there was growth there. And I think that growth is why they weren't able to risk him through waivers. I had him on my final 53 roster projection because I did not think that they could possibly risk losing him because of how well he played. The Green Bay Packers just traded a 7th round pick for my boy Malik Willis because their backup quarterback situation was dog water. A team like that could just take Hall and be like, you play in a very similar system to what we run, and you've played well. I'll take you as my backup, and we'll see if we can extract more out of you. I think you were risking that with how well he played in those finals preseason games, considering he had a game where he looked good as a starter before the concussion. And the second game, I feel like those two starting games almost cancel each other out because he was a rookie 5th round pick and he shouldn't have been starting anyways. So I don't necessarily think, hey, you know what? I don't have confidence he can be the guy for a team, the franchise guy. But I do think that he is a very good quarterback that should be rostered and developed because you never know when that guy's going to have to start 8-10 games for you. This is a football game now where quarterback is so much more important than it was 25, 30 years ago, Dave. You could have a Sean Salisbury come in and start 4 or 5 games for you, and you could win them all because you had a good defense and you had a good supporting cast around him. It's a lot harder to do that in today's NFL with how the rules are. So if you have a quality guy, don't get rid of him. I think the Vikings have a quality guy in Jaren Hall, and I don't want to get rid of him. I want to keep him. I want to nurture him.
There's also the fact that KOC's offense is complicated. It's very involved, and it takes a while to learn. He's got 2 years under, this will be his 2nd year, under that defense and learning that playbook. You don't get that. That in itself is a value that needs to be considered as well. And if he's playing efficiently in it like he did last weekend, that's a good thing to have, especially, and I love your theory about next year, keeping him as the number 2. You have somebody in the room that knows what KOC wants, can run the KOC defense or offense without, having to, oh my God, I got to dumb it down and talk in the headset which way to throw the ball to type like we had last year. So I think it's a value. And I think you're right that next year we look for him to take that backup job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really excited about him potentially being the backup quarterback long-term because I do think that there's a lot of potential there. I do think, and you mentioned Kevin O'Connell's offense is complicated. He ran a version of this at BYU, so a lot of the concepts and stuff and how to work through progressions were very similar to him. But it's the NFL. There's a lot more nuance and context that you have to know versus a college offense. So I equated it to, hey, he was in Algebra 1. Now he's going to Algebra 3 without having that middle ground at all. You got to learn Algebra 3 without knowing the concepts of Algebra 2, buddy. And it can be very difficult to do. But I do think that he's figuring it out. I do think that he's solid. And I think you can continue to develop him. And I think having a developmental guy is a good thing. I don't care that it's 2024, and if you don't have the guy, you don't have anybody kind of thing. I also think that if you have a guy that you're developing, maybe he becomes that thing. Or maybe he takes you on a Case Keenum run, and then somebody will give him big money, and you get a comp pick back. There's so many layers to this, and I'm just glad that it feels like Jaren Hall is going to be on the roster. I have him making the roster. And get excited because we are so close, Dave, to Minnesota Vikings playing a football game that matters.
Yes, we are. And Big Rail and Dad, I'm assuming you thinking Bo Nix will have the best stats at the end of the year. You're referring to all the rookie quarterbacks that were drafted this year and not across the board beating Patrick Mahomes or anybody else. So he's definitely going to beat JJ McCarthy because, unfortunately.
T. Cooper said, I remember when you guys said Bo Nix was the fourth rounder. Yeah, I'm not changing that because of the preseason. I'm not changing Drake May's grade. I'm not changing Caleb Williams' grade. I'm not changing JJ McCarthy's grade. Do it against a real NFL defense. Do it in a real NFL game. Do it a few times because there's always anomalies and outliers. Bad quarterbacks have great performances. Great quarterbacks have bad performances. Let's get a sample size before I'm willing to change my mind. And you know what? I do that with every prospect. I'm not going to be like, oh, I need to completely change my grade because of one outlier performance. Let's see a trend. If we see a trend, I'll reevaluate. And you know what? You should reevaluate with new information. You should be willing to adapt your opinion. If Bo Nix balls out in his rookie of the year, I may have to eat crow. But we're not even close to that point yet. I'm sticking to my guns.
It's going to be one of those fun things to watch from outside since JJ McCarthy's on IR for the season. We don't have a dog in that fight to root for. I think it's going to be fun to watch to see how Drake May did. And he had a beautiful pass to what's his name? For a touchdown yesterday. It was called back because somebody was illegal motion. But it is what it is. And the Pats are going to stink if anybody's curious.
Yeah. I will say I was impressed with Drake May's ability to maneuver that ugly pocket last night. I thought that was a great sign. I still don't know if I'd play him right away because of how bad the O-line is. We'll see what happens the next couple days. You never know. All right, Dave. Are you ready for my 53-man roster prediction?
Not quite yet. Doc Proto says, are we really mentioning tanking before we get to the 53? Doc, who's mentioning tanking?
I'm not.
I'm not.
It was X in the chat. X in the chat says, I think we should tank try to get a top 5 pick to bolster the defense, set JJ up with a great team next year.
It won't happen. They're going to be competitive.
Dalton saying Malik Willis could turn into Steve McNair too. I might be one of Malik Willis's biggest fans. If anybody can fix him, it would be somebody like Matt LaFleur. I don't. Steve McNair was the 3rd overall pick out of Alcorn State. Sorry, the 5th overall pick. Not only that, as an FCS player, a 1 AA player, he was 3rd for the Heisman Trophy. That will never be duplicated again. He was special. Really special. And I love Malik Willis. I think his tools are great. Hasn't been able to put it together. And it sucks that he went to a team that didn't want him. The front office did. The coaching staff didn't. Now maybe with Green Bay, he can be something, which if he is, God, that'd be bittersweet for me. So I still hope the best for Malik.
That would mean Jordan Love had an issue. So Malik gets in there to play, if that's the case.
T.
I don't mind
Kubler
Jordan Love having that issue, walking into a bar or something.
T. Kubler says, how did McCarthy earn a gold jacket in the preseason then if preseason was meaningless crap? Some people were saying he deserved a gold jacket. It wasn't this show. It was not this show. It's not meaningless crap, but it's really hard to call it super meaningful football because there's so many outside variables that you have to account for that you don't have to in the regular season. Like everything being basic. So, all right, Dave, it's time. 53-man roster. Do you have a projection yourself?
Yeah, we talked about it yesterday on Two Old Bloggers.
All right, so here's how let's do this. I'm going to read mine, and then I want you to let me know if you have anything different. And
Okay.
we'll kind of go from there because I'm sure most of the people listening or watching right now have listened to Two Old Bloggers, which, friendly reminder, in 2 weeks, it's back on Saturday. Make sure you put it in your calendars. Saturday the 7th. It will be Sunday the 1st this week. Saturday the 7th next week. And it will be Saturdays until football season is done. Please remember that. All right. Quarterback. I have 3. Sam Darnold, Nick Mullens, and Jaren Hall.
We agree.
I think Hall's final 3 games, even before the rule change this morning, solidified his spot on the roster. People were absolutely crowning McCarthy. But this is why, with all due respect to fans, I don't listen to fans because fans are fanatic. They have too much bias. And we have bias in the show too because we're fans, but we work really hard to not include that bias in our work.
Or we say,
which is why sometimes my opinions aren't very liked. And I'm okay with that because I come at them with as much knowledge and passion and research as I can. All right. Dr. Proto, don't worry. This is why you need to subscribe and ring the bell, which I'm sure you already do.
Sure he is.
If you guys have the bell rung on the site to get those notifications, with how Dave schedules, it will tell you and give you a half-hour warning when a show's about to start, and it'll tell you when the show starts. So then you don't have to worry about remembering, as all these shows, as you said, change their times. It's the easiest thing you can do. Plus, it helps us. Helps us more than you know by subscribing. And Dave leaving positive comments on Apple Podcasts.
Yes. Always helps.
We have two new ones. Sean Connery 272 says, huge fan of the pod, good level-headed and well-researched analysis. Fast EJA says, Tyler and Dave are very knowledgeable and well-sourced when it comes to Vikings news and info. They have a good mix of optimism, critical thinking, and authenticity with all their content.
Big Rail and Dad asked, does the pup count against the 53? And I don't think he's referring to doggies.
Well, he should. It's National Dog Day, and Odie and Cheddar are good boys. But no, the pup does not. So here's how the pup works. If you're on the physically unable to perform list, you count against the 90-man roster. However, you do not count against the 53. And the rules, once the regular season begins, are the same as injured reserve. You're out 4 games, then you have the 21-day practice window, and then you have to be back on the active roster. Norsefius, thank you for joining. We'll talk to you later, my man. All right. Running back, Dave. I have 4. And I want to shout out Kene Wongwu here because he made my final 53. He had not shown the ability to be a quality running back in the National Football League. He did during training camp in the preseason. He deserves credit for that. I had him as a cut all off season until we started seeing him on the field. And he deserves praise for that. Good for him. He took that step. He's going to be running back 3. And I think you can trust him a lot more than you could have in past years, which is great to see. He's not just a special teams guy anymore. I think he might actually get some real running back snaps this year. But I have 4. Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler, Kene Wongwu, and your fullback, CJ Ham.
We agreed.
Wide receiver might be where we differ. I have 5. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor, Brandon Powell, Tristan Jackson. I do not have Trent Sherfield.
We have 6, and we have Trent Sherfield. And by we, I mean me and Darren, because it was a combined.
Sherfield's going to be the interesting one. I gave the Sherfield spot to somebody else later on, we'll talk about that player when we get to him, because I have a theory where I think that he's going to get the spot over a guy like Sherfield, even though Sherfield is viewed as a really good punt gunner. Brian Ports says RB3 could be a waiver wire addition. That's possible. It would not shock me if the Vikings do 2 to 3 pickups. Last year, they did 2 to 3 pickups from, what do you call it? From cut down day into the next day, Wednesday.
Yeah, usually within the first 24 to 48 hours after. Cut down day ends at 3:00 tomorrow Central, and then everybody within hours starts assembling their practice squad. But then usually within that 24-hour period to 48-hour period, you start seeing people move in and off as other teams start those last little bits. We always call it the final 53, and it never is. But it's the deadline, so we go by it.
Yeah. Okay, so this is where I'm really interested to see how the Vikings do things. Let's talk about Gaskin, because Doug mentions that he should be on the 53. I think he played well, but I think he doesn't have quite the upside that Wongwu does. I think Gaskin just kind of is what it is. And that's a good player. That's a solid player that you can trust. I thought his pass protection this past week against the Eagles was outstanding. But I also don't think that he's quite good enough in that potential to where you want to have him. And I do think they're going to try and practice squad him. I also wouldn't be shocked if he gets poached. Remember, he was on the practice squad of the Vikings last year. The Rams poached him, then cut him, and he came back to Minnesota. So that's an interesting one. It wouldn't shock me if Gaskin made the roster. Right now, I'm going to say no. But maybe they value special teams that much. We'll find out. Tight end. I only have 3, Dave. Josh Albert, Johnny Munt, and Nick Muse.
And we agree on that one.
The one interesting thing here is, does TJ Hawkinson make the active roster? The reason why TJ Hawkinson would make the active roster, they think he plays before week 5.
And that would be the only reason. But that's going to be interesting to see what they do with him tomorrow. Because, yes, you're correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most everybody assume he starts out on IR or the PUP.
Mm-hmm. I also think that Tunyon could make the cut. He's got back spasms, but the organization did talk a lot this offseason about how much they like Tunyon in OTAs and minicamp. So is there something there? We'll find out. I genuinely don't think he makes the team. I think he could be one guy placed on injured reserve. So that's something to monitor. Offensive tackle, Dave, have 4. Christian Darrisaw, Brian O'Neill, David Questenberry, Walter Rouse.
Concur.
Mm-hmm. Rouse had his warts. They also played him at guard, which I thought was interesting. I think with his skill set, he might be better suited for guard because he just doesn't have the foot speed for a really, really good tackle.
What did I say when they drafted him?
Guard.
Anyways. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm interested to kind of see his career arc. Interior offensive line, Dave, had 5. Garrett Bradbury, Blake Brandel, Ed Ingram, Dan Feeney, Michael Juergens.
We concur.
All right. Juergens, I don't necessarily think earned a spot on the roster. And I use air quotes there for the non-YouTube people because he was pretty rough a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're that rough, a lot of times you're not going to make a roster. But he was a 7th round pick, and they do see a big future for him, as evidenced by the NFL draft video from this offseason. So that's something to be aware of.
Plus, preseason game 1, he had a heck of a game. It's just 2 and 3 that makes you go, especially 2. That was bad. But now, what do you do with Dan Feeney? We've got to make him a roster.
I think he's just your... I don't think he's that hurt. I haven't actually seen or heard anything where they say he's actually hurt.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But this could be a situation where they do an injury settlement with Feeney, if that is the case, and they bring somebody else in. I genuinely know nothing about Feeney. I haven't seen anything, heard anything. Have you, Dave?
All I've heard is that he's hurt. That's why we didn't see him this week.
Okay. So this will be a position to watch because even if they stay pretty chalk, they could make a move.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody hits waivers, they bring them in. Edge rusher, I have 5. Jonathan Grenard, Dallas Turner, Andrew Van Ginkel, Pat Jones II, Jihad Ward.
We disagree.
Okay.
Fifth one
Where do we disagree?
Jihad Ward. On the 5th one, we have Andre Carter.
I don't think Andre Carter showed enough to warrant a roster spot. And the reason why I picked Ward is because of the flexibility element he offers. He can go inside and be a thumper. He can be outside and set the edge and rush off the edge. And he's got a decent variety of moves. He's not a phenomenal football player, but I think he's a really solid edge 5. Whereas the potential guys that you have, your Bo Richter, your Gabe Murphy, who's hurt, and it wouldn't shock me if he's on season-ending IR, or Andre Carter, I don't think have shown you enough where you can count on them to do some of the basic stuff. The flash stuff is awesome, but it's not about the plays you make. It's about the plays you don't. And so much about defensive line and trench play, Dave, doesn't ever hit the stat sheet, especially the good stuff. You got to be able to be relied upon. You got to set the edge. You got to not be a catastrophe. And I think Ward is the least catastrophic of those guys and the guy you can count on to be more consistent. And he's going to give you the aptitude in those positive stats. Now, does he have potential like the other guys? No. And that's where I think this conversation gets interesting. I think Pat Jones is a trade candidate. Final year of his deal, was not drafted by the Minnesota Vikings, was not a priority for Brian Flores. And the emergence of Ward makes him more expendable. So then maybe you do get an Andre Carter situation where he makes the roster because you moved on from Pat Jones. I think the Vikings keep at least 5 edge rushers. I really do. I don't think there's a scenario where by the end of this whole process, by like Friday, that they don't have 5 or more edge rushers on this roster.
I agree with that.
If they didn't.
And when it comes to Patrick Jones, I hope they do trade him and get draft capital for it. Patrick Jones, to me, he's not great, obviously. He's not good, but he's adequate. I put him in the adequate pile. You know what you get with him. He's there, nothing great. Jihad Ward may fall into that same adequate deal. And then the question is, do you go with upside, with development, like with Andre Carter or whomever, over, having 2 adequate guys versus an adequate upside one? I don't know. It's going to be interesting, but this is our first or second difference on this.
Yeah. Okay. So we have more. Let's get to linebackers. This is where we're going to have the biggest difference, Dave. I have 5.
4.
And I'm going to tell you why I have 5, and this is where the Trent Sherfield conversation comes into play. Blake Cashman, Ivan Pace Jr., Brian Asamoah, Kamu Grugier-Hill, Dallas Gant. I think Dallas Gant's going to get the spot that Najee Thompson normally does, where he is your core special teams guy, and you build your special teams units around him, and he's going to hold the fort down until Najee comes back. That is why I have him over Trent Sherfield, because I think he's a more valuable special teams asset. He played relatively well at linebacker. Plus, I think Asamoah or Grugier-Hill may be off the roster anyways due to a trade or a waiver claim. So that's what I'm looking at. I think Gant is your Najee Thompson for the 2024 season.
And you ate it up with Sherfield, where I kept Sherfield. That makes sense. I don't disagree with you. And we talked about this yesterday on...
Yeah, we did.
Specifically on Gant. No, I'm talking Darren and I did. But because we like what we saw from Gant too. And that would be an interesting fit if that happens. So we'll find out.
So Kubler, he was drafted by the Vikings, not by Kwesi and not by this coaching staff. So there's a different level of commitment when you're talking about those guys. And it's not necessarily an insult per se. It's just one of those things that kind of just is what it is. So that's how I'm looking at it. We'll see if that comes to fruition. I honestly don't know, but I do think that for those reasons, Jones could be a trade candidate. Now, we've got more as I'm taking care of that. Perfect. Cornerback. It's been a very contentious position all throughout camp. I have 6.
It's been a tragic position throughout camp.
Yeah. I think those are 2 really good adjectives, contentious and tragic.
And we have.
But we have a room with a high floor. Byron Murphy Jr., Shaq Griffin, Stephon Gilmore, Caleb Evans, Fabian Moreau, Dwight McGlothern.
Huh.
Evans has been talked about as a potential trade candidate. I don't get that. He's the only guy with any NFL experience on your books for next year in this room. McGlothern technically is, but it's an unguaranteed contract that you can cut him for literally no money. Why would you trade Evans, who's been a solid starting cornerback for you? He had a rough December last year. Trading him for anything less than a 4th-round pick, to me, would be a bad process. Because at least if you're trading for a 4th-round pick, you're getting equal value.
Hey, we agreed. All 6.
Perfect. Safety, I have 5. Harrison Smith, Cam Bynum, Josh Metellus, Theo Jackson, Lewis Cine. I have seen making the initial 53-man roster over Jay Ward. I still think a trade is potentially in place.
We disagreed. We've cut Cine and we kept Jay Ward. But we had 5.
I wouldn't keep Jay Ward. I think his tackling was atrocious. I showed that he does not have the versatility that we perceived. He's already been moved back to safety. Corner was a disaster.
Yeah, but what have we seen from Cine? I haven't seen anything special from him either. The only thing Cine has is his ability to crash down, which is fast. His tackling isn't the greatest, but his speed to crash is good. But other than that, I haven't seen anything. The one way I think Cine makes it is because of the pride factor. Because
I would say
he's the
less about pride.
First pick of this administration.
I'd say less about pride and more about salary cap, because you're going to eat a lot of dead money by getting rid of Cine, and you're not going to eat a lot of dead money with Jay Ward. So if it is equal or close to equal, I think the money might carry a factor here. Just because his full 4 years is guaranteed. You got to really, really be bad if you're going to cut that guy and eat that money. I don't care if it's pick 32. And I don't think Ward was better than Cine. I think you could classify them as equal, where I think Ward's play was a little more up and down and Cine's was a little more steady. But if you gave them like an overall grade, put them around the same. They're both around a 6 or a 7 out of 10 in the preseason, which, I mean, that's not exactly saying a whole lot. But you're talking about the last safety on this depth chart. The one thing that Ward has over Cine is special teams. He's good at special teams, and Cine doesn't play him.
Right, and that's something that Cine was going to have to do. Now, Cine has played a little bit of special teams this preseason, but he's going to have to love and adopt that. And why he can't be a good gunner. He has those skills. Yeah. The crashing speed is perfect for a gunner. He just, hopefully, Najee Thompson, did a mind meld, Vulcan mind meld, and say, hey, this is how you do it.
Yeah. And specialists, 0 surprises. Will Reichert's your kicker. Ryan Wright's your punter. Andrew DePaula is your all-pro long snapper.
We did not disagree there.
So we only had like 3 disagreements, which that's not bad.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all flushes out. Darren and I had a few, and I usually defaulted with Darren if I couldn't convince him. But It's good. I mean, we're close. We're all thinking along the same lines. And I think everybody in the chat is pretty much close. And I asked him on the very first tweet, when I say, SKOL everyone, when I go in and load the show, I asked, is there anyone today that surprised you in the cuts and where we're different? And I asked yesterday on Two Old Bloggers, and when I posted the story over at Daily Norseman this morning, are there any differences? Do you perceive, as a fan, you wanting to see somebody else versus who we selected, and why? Because we can have differences, especially at the guys at the bottom that are sitting in that 5th and 6th slot. So, JD Brown, Najee's hurt. I don't know what it is, but they stuck him on season-ending IR.
Knee injury.
Yeah, that was right.
We don't know what.
Cleaned out or something. He had a knee procedure. Now, when he flew out to Washington or Baltimore or something like that, he was getting a second opinion. Then he came back and they put him on IR for the season. Oh, defensive line, interior. Yes, you did not. Thank you, Dalton.
Wow, I can't believe we glossed over it. All right, let's get to the defensive line, because this is where there are a lot of intriguing elements here, Dave. 5.
We agree on the number.
Harrison Phillips, Jerry Tillery, Jonathan Bullard, Jaquelin Roy, Levi Drake, Rodriguez.
All right, we settled for Jonah Williams over Jaquelin Roy.
I don't think Williams makes the team, and I'm surprised other people are having him on the team, because he didn't play at all in the preseason. And in practice, he was just there.
That's why. I think Jaquelin Roy was just there. But that one spot bothered me all this weekend when I was thinking about it, because you would like somebody. I mean, even though I can't see Taki Taimani, I see Taki Taimani making the practice squad. But I can't see him. Yeah, Big Rail that just talked. Hey, no Taki. Maybe Taki takes that spot. I don't know. Jaquelin, unfortunately, his roots from LSU. He thought he was going to be good. We had him as a breakout player earlier, as we were going through the summer, and it just hasn't happened. But
so here's the thing with Taki. People are going to look overall at his play, but you also have to factor in where he started on the depth chart. He started at the bottom. It takes a lot to move that far up. I think Taki, if he makes a roster, I wouldn't be shocked, but I think he's first or second guy you add to the practice squad, and you get him a couple elevations and potentially add him to the active roster once you have an injury or two. I like Taki. I think he's a good football player, but I think they believe in Roy. I really do. And I think one of the reasons why Roy didn't play a lot during the first couple preseason games, and I think he played more in the last one because they needed bodies. I think they do believe him they do believe in Roy. So
they drafted him. So there's always that pride issue. They drafted him. He's one of their picks.
Jared, it wasn't that he started at the bottom like every UDFA does. He was at the bottom of the bottom. Every UDFA's got to work their way up, but he started way down low. So you're going to have to really show out, and I think he played well, and I think he deserves to be with the Minnesota Vikings organization. I'm just not convinced that they believe he did enough to make the active roster. And this is a prediction. This is not what I would do. This is what I think is going to happen. So
I'd love
would Taki make fine? You what?
I would love to see Taki developed.
One of the interesting things about nose tackles, you don't necessarily have to be a high draft pick to be really good. You can find nose tackles as 5th, 6th, 7th round picks in UDFAs.
And Hugh, yes, the offense should be better when TJ returns.
Absolutely.
He's the best tight end on the team when fully healthy. There's no doubt there.
Yeah.
And you talked about
100%.
that today on Steak and Potatoes.
Meat and potatoes.
That you were asked the question, are they going to change the approach having Oliver or Munt or whomever starting when TJ still isn't back yet? And your response was basically, no, they're going to do the same thing. It's maybe less.
Yeah.
You got to remember there's no chemistry between Sam Darnold and TJ Hawkinson yet.
Unless they threw and we didn't know about it, which is possible. Let's be real.
Right. But I don't think they may have played catch. I don't think he's cutting. I mean, we've heard, I think he's to the point where he's starting to cut, but it's not full go.
Mm-hmm.
And Lefty thinks Johnny Munt's a stud, and I think KOC agrees with you.
Best tight end 3 in the league, Johnny Munt. That is our show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Like, comment, subscribe. And if you're listening on podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. All of that helps us. And it helps us grow, helps us reach more people. And we want to give them the best Vikings content that there is. And that's why we're here. We're going to be back on Wednesday night. We're going to be talking about who made the roster. And we're going to be talking about what moves have happened. Were there trades? And all of that and more. You are not going to want to miss it. We're going to be here all week. We're going to be here all season talking your Minnesota Vikings. Until then, I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings, everybody.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!